Without further ado, I would like to introduce a man who needs no introduction, but I'll give a small introduction. Simon Stewart, creator of WebDriver and the project lead for Selenium. He's worked at all the places that do all the cool things for the most part, and he would love to come and talk to you about the state of the union for Selenium. So give it up for Simon Stewart.
Morning, folks. So excited to be here. How about you? Thank you very much for that introduction, Dave. Watch me whip, watch me nay-nay. Sorry. It's going to be a fun conference, I think. So, State of the Union. Why do we call it State of the Union? It's because originally Selenium and WebDriver were two separate projects, and Jason Huggins and myself got drunk together one day and went, it would be a great idea if we merged the projects. And the next morning reconsidered and went, actually, it would be great if we merged the projects. So Selenium 2 is where we merged it, and so every conference we've had the State of the Union, like, hey, how are things hanging together? I think it's particularly apt to call that out in Texas. Cool. So, overview of the W3C spec process. I'm not going to talk about Selenium for a little bit. I'm going to talk about the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium. Tim Berners-Lee just got like a Turing Award. Like, the web is quite an important place, and the standards that we use day to day are the ones that are curated by the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium. If you use CSS, if you use HTML, if you use XML, does anyone here still use XML? Yeah, there's a couple of people nodding. They're not going to put their hands up. And you may or may not know, I mean, hopefully you know, that WebDriver is going through the W3C specification process. If you go to w3c.org/tr/WebDriver, you'll find reams and reams of text. It's massive. It's not like bedtime reading. Like, you're never going to sit there and go like, you know what? My life is too interesting. I'm going to read this spec. So the spec process is basically 4 separate stages. There's the I have no idea what I'm doing, so I'm going to write it down, which is the editor's draft. And we can publish an editor's draft whenever we want to. When we think there are going to be no major changes to functionality, such that if someone were to begin implementing it, if we change something, they would have to change their implementation. You enter what's known as candidate recommendation, or CR, which is basically a way of saying, like, I think this one could be done. We could implement this. It might just work. It's a 1 in a million chance, but it might just work. And once you've got 2 separate implementations, there are criteria for exiting a candidate recommendation period, but typically that's 2 separate implementations. You go to what's known as proposed recommendation, where you can go like, hey, look, this has been implemented. And then the W3C do like the votes and making sure that we haven't broken patent policy and all that bits and pieces. And then you go to what's known as W3C recommendation. And at that point, the spec is finished. At any point up to recommendation, you can walk away from the spec, and it might not happen. So, I mean, that's kind of, who's interested in like the inner workings of the W3C? Like, I go to the meetings, the face-to-face meetings. I don't find it terribly interesting. But the reason why I'm telling you this stuff is because April the 1st, WebDriver is now a candidate recommendation. That means that if you happen to be a browser vendor, you can now start implementing that spec, and you know that we're not going to muck you around. I mean, we are kind of lucky in that we have multiple implementations already. Like, I know lots of people are frustrated about the speed that Gecko driver has been moving at, the Firefox stuff. Has anyone been bitten by Firefox? There's a lot of hands in this room. So, yeah, I mean, the thing that Mozilla did ages ago is they made a technical choice. And their technical choice was, we will implement the spec. And they did that like years and years ago. You remember, maybe you don't, stood up on stage and went, we'll deliver WebDriver 3, Selenium 3 by Christmas. And the joke is, like, we never said which year. So the Mozilla guys went, we have ages until like electrolysis and the splitting up of the internals of Gecko, of Mozilla and stuff like that, Firefox. And they went, we'll just implement the spec, and by the time the old way of doing things becomes a problem, the new way of doing things will be complete. It didn't quite work out that way. So they have probably the first spec-compliant version of the W3C spec out there. If you use the latest nightly version of Firefox and the latest version of Gecko Driver and the latest version of Selenium, that's actually a pretty sweet combination. It's pretty good. There is also a second implementation that drives Internet Explorer, which is written and maintained by our own Jim Evans. And it looks like those are going to be the two implementations that we have to get us out of candidate recommendation. We could really do with a hand with the test suite. Like the comfort, like, who here works in testing? Right, okay, so you're really good at like detail focused work and stuff like that. And who here writes code for a living? Yeah, some of you. I mean, who here doesn't write code for a living? Okay, there's like a handful of hands. Handful of hands. There's a fractal hand coming up. We could really do with a hand getting that conformance test suite done. And so if you go to github.com, W3C, you can find the web platform tests, and you can contribute some pull requests for the specification, the WebDriver stuff. We would be delighted and over the moon, and would move the whole project forward. So yeah, I mean, of all the people in the world, you guys and gals and folks and anthropods from the planet, wherever it is, our best place to help us. And we could really do with a hand to finish it. So yeah, it's now a candidate recommendation. We exit the candidate recommendation period on the 1st of September. So I guess we better finish this, right? We could do with the help. That would be really super helpful. So once we ship the specification, we then get to ship Selenium 4. Like, who here hasn't yet done the upgrade to Selenium 3? Lots of people. So what will be in Selenium 4? Like Selenium 3, we removed the original Selenium core. If you use the Java bindings, you have the legrc package, which gives you the old APIs, but they're backed by the new way of doing things. Selenium 4 is going to be a far more minor change. All we're doing is we're changing the protocol. So at the moment, we speak the open source JSON wire protocol, which is the one that we sort of grew organically out of various bits and pieces. Like, it has numeric status codes. And the reason why the wire protocol has numeric status codes is because the original IE driver was written in C++, and you return error codes with numbers. And so it's like, I'll just reuse those numbers. That'll be fine. Like, it was not a carefully designed protocol. The W3C one is, right? It uses like meaningful things. There's the element identifier is not shouty element. It's like element with a UUID afterwards. So it's far harder to accidentally return things that mutate into elements and cause chaos. So that's really what it's going to be. Just like we're going to speak the W3C protocol. Certainly in the Java bindings, we will continue to also speak the JSON wire protocol. So it's going to be forward and backward compatible. You'll be able to just slip it into your grids, and everything will just work. You've heard that one before, right? We should probably have a quick chat about how to migrate to Selenium 3. Get on with it. Like, I am deeply passionate about maintaining forward and backward compatibility. Like, as we add new features and new capabilities to Selenium when we do releases, it's really important to me that you drop in that jar to the Java bindings and your tests continue to work. Like, I never want you to throw away code that you've written and that you love and you cherish and that is providing value to you if we can possibly help it, which is why the old RC APIs are still present. So hopefully, you can upgrade to 3. Now, there's a lot of reasons why not to do it. One of them is, I think, because we're terrible at naming things in the Selenium project. Like, everything is Selenium. It's a bit like John Malkovich, right? Like Malkovich, 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 Malkovich. The Python package used to be Selenium, Selenium, import Selenium. So. What were we thinking? So the problem is, like, there's a lot of stuff that gets called Selenium, and we're not really very clear about what that is. So allow me to try and clear things up a tiny bit. These are the moving pieces that you need to change when you're doing your upgrade to Selenium. There are the language bindings. That's pure Java, pure Python, pure Ruby, pure .NET, pure Go, pure PHP, pure whatever it is, right? And those language bindings offer a stable API. And between 2 and 3, we kept those APIs rock solid. Like, you should be able to just drop things in. If you're a Java user and you get weird error messages about expected conditions, anyone seen those? Yeah, update your version of Guava. But really, like, those things are rock solid. So you should just be able to drop in the jars. The problem that you have is that we also call the things that drive the web browsers Selenium, right? So the language bindings are one thing, and we call that Selenium, but the thing that also drives the web browser, that also gets called Selenium, right? So you may have heard of Chrome driver, Gecko driver, Microsoft WebDriver, the IE driver server, Safari driver. Like, all those are the executables that sit in this gray box. And they are typically provided by the vendor, and they speak the wire protocol, or they speak a wire protocol. All of them speak the JSON wire protocol, except for Gecko driver, which speaks the W3C one. What does this mean? Like, first rule of computer programming, only change one variable at a time. So don't upgrade everything, change all the browsers, stick in the new Gecko driver, and then go, well, it's not working. Because, I mean, you haven't helped yourself, right? Change the language bindings. If you're a Firefox user, put Marionette false in your desired capabilities, and run your tests. And it should be identical. Firefox users, you need that Marionette false to get the old XPI driver, okay? Which is the version that ships with 2.5.3. There should be no reason not to just drop in these jars and go for it. We do have a deprecation policy on the project of we deprecate for at least one release, and then we feel free to delete things. So if you find you're trying to jump from 2.5.3 to, I think 3.4 is going to be the next release we do, you might find things change and break in interesting ways. Just track the latest releases. It should be good. Once you've done the upgrade to 3 of the language bindings, then take a look at upgrading the version of Gecko driver, Chrome driver, whatever it is, right? Like, change one variable at a time. You can do this. If you have a problem, come have a chat to us on the IRC channel, on the mailing lists and things like that. We are here to help, and we really do want you to have like this smooth upgrade process. But leaving yourself on 2.5.3 means you're missing out on bug fixes, means you're missing out on new capabilities, it means you're missing out on the evolving W3C work, which is a bit of a pity. So yeah, moving pieces. Dave mentioned this in his talk, the Software Freedom Conservancy. It's the biggest foundation you've never heard of. Can anyone name a project other than Selenium that's hosted by the SFC? Git, yeah. Boost. Yeah, Wine, Samba. Like, there are all these things that are sort of part of the fabric of open source, right, that we're just used to. And Selenium as well, right? So what does the SFC provide? It provides like a neutral home for open source projects. Like, we don't have to worry about politics. We don't need to worry about patent law. We don't need to worry about accounting. They can do enormously helpful things like set up this conference. They are passionate about free and open software. Right? It's a natural home for a project like ours, where we believe in like open community, and we are open source. They have played a central role in helping the Selenium project. So originally, we were like any old open source project, right? And we took contributions from everyone. And then we started down the road of the W3C standard work. We realized that we didn't know who had the copyright or the intellectual property of the code, which is less than ideal, right? And the SFC helped us go back and get contributor license agreements from every single person and contributor who had given us code and the companies too. And that has allowed us to move forward. And that's the thing that enabled us to do the W3C work. And that's the thing that has enabled all the browser vendors to feel safe implementing this standard. And that has all made your jobs possible. So, I mean, that's kind of cool. If you think that work is important, consider supporting the SFC. You know, the Selenium project, from events like this, we make a contribution to them. But you can join as an individual supporter, which is good. If you'd like to know more about the SFC, the Software Freedom Conservancy, Karen is going to be doing a talk about it later. Go to that talk. It's going to be good. She is like even more passionate about open source than basically anyone other than Richard Stallman that I've met. It's going to be good, and she will tell you all about it, and we are really, really lucky to have her at the conference. So the SFC have made Selenium the project it is, and I'd like to just publicly acknowledge that. Before talking about terrible mistakes I've made. Like, I'm opinionated about software. Anyone who's worked with me will know this. Anyone who's read my code will know this. Jim is not saying a word. He's at the front. He's like, it's all right. You can heckle. It's fine. It's all good. The problem is that over time, you learn, right? If you're not learning over time, what the hell are you doing? Like, I mean, there's a sort of story when you interview people, like, oh, he's got 10 years experience. Is it 10 years experience, or is it the same year of experience 10 times? Like, they're not the same, right? So you gotta sit there and you gotta learn and you gotta think. And you know, as we make the move from Selenium 3 to Selenium 4, as we try and figure out what we're going to do, people have been going through the code base, and we've been looking at some of the terrible things we've done. And I thought I'd share some of those. This is from the 2007 presentation I gave at GTAC, where I introduced WebDriver to the world. You can see here something that's kind of interesting. Like, given that the talk was about WebDriver, and we read left to right, you would imagine WebDriver would be on the left-hand side of that slide, and not on the right. And the original vision of WebDriver, this is the APIs that you used in Selenium, it was like the machine code of test automation, of browser automation, right? Who here writes machine code for a living? Some people do it for fun, right, because it's kind of fun. But nobody here really uses machine code for a living, right? It's just the layering is too wrong. We like to use proper programming languages. I am an unapologetic Java nerd. Like, I love that language. So, I mean, this is kind of interesting, right? Like, software development is filled with people being angry and upset. Like, you suck. It's awful. XML is for losers. Soap, ha ha ha. Positivity, people. Like, the whole house of cards works, right? That's a miracle. Like, the latest Apple Macintoshes are amazing. The MacBook Pros are amazing pieces of technology. They're wafer thin. They weigh almost nothing. And people go like, oh, well, I've lost my function keys. Come on, people. So positivity. So the idea was, like, it was going to be this sort of atomic thing, this sort of machine code for your test, right? This super low thing that you never really saw. And the idea was you would layer bits and pieces on top of it. The page objects. I thought I'd articulated page objects properly, and for about 4 conferences in a row, we get talks like, here's how you automatically generate a page object. It's like, technically, that's solving one of the hardest problems in AI. because a page object has deep knowledge of the structure of the page on one side, and then it talks about the services the page offers on the other. So somehow people were like, I can read your HTML and I can tell you what that page is meant to represent to a human being. It's like, that's astonishing. That isn't what happened. So page objects were meant to be there. And then, because this is my mistake, I thought fit was going to be interesting. Anyone used fit? Functional integration testing. It's a like wiki-based thing with tables, and you type in, and it looks super nice. It was a terrible idea. So it's like, hey, yeah, definitely use fit. Definitely do not use fit. Page objects, they're good. But fit, not so much. But this is the original vision. And actually, there's a lot about this vision that's still right. Like, WebDriver should not be the primary focus of your testing, right? What is the purpose of testing? Why do we test? We don't test so we can say to people, I have 1 million test suites. Whoop-de-doo. Well done. Congratulations. We test so that when we release software, we are confident that it works. And we want to have that confidence as quickly as possible. Like, when I was at Google, I used to tell people, stop writing Selenium tests. You're at the wrong layer, wrong level. You should be focusing more on unit tests and integration tests. And your Selenium tests are like the cherry on the cake. They're the bit right at the end. So if you find yourself with a test suite that's hard to maintain, slow, frequently broken, stop. Think about what you're doing. Why are we doing this? Could we replicate this level of confidence with smaller tests? Can we have unit tests instead? Of course, you need to make sure the system works end to end. And of course, I'm strongly advocating using Selenium for those tests. But I'm saying that not all your tests need to be Selenium. Desired capabilities. I have had long and interesting conversations with people about the nature of desire. This is how it was originally designed to be used. Like back in the day, we didn't have many computing resources. There definitely wasn't a Source Labs, right? So the idea was you would go, I need something that meets these criteria. In this case, it accepts SSL certs. And then you go and you create your WebDriver instance, and it would come back, and you go, for this particular set of tests, I need this kind of functionality. And so you take a look at the capabilities that return to you. After you instantiate your WebDriver, how many of you check its capabilities to see whether they are appropriate for the test that you're about to perform? Yep, absolutely no one. I don't do it, and I wrote it. Yeah, so we had desired capabilities, and people were going like, well, why? The remote end is free to do whatever it wants. It's like, it's free to do whatever it wants. So you can ask for IE on Linux, and you can get like Firefox. It's like, yes, that is legally possible. And happened. And so people go like, what we need. Jason Laber in particular was very fond of this. He goes, we need required capabilities. And we will definitely do the checks of the required capabilities. Did we? No. Like, even the people implementing the browser, the remote end, the drivers themselves, forgot that they needed to check all of the required capabilities. And so it come across the wire, it's like, that's very important. But we're going to ignore it. To make it worse, the standalone server doesn't even bother looking at the required capabilities. I was going through the code the other day. It's like, hang on a second. We appear to have completely omitted this, which tells me something very important. Nobody cares about required capabilities. It also tells me very few people understand what the heck desired capabilities are. So the lesson I take away from this is that APIs should be correct, and they should not do unexpected things. When you ask for Firefox, you should get Firefox. We had 2 bites of that particular cherry. We didn't get it right. But in the W3C spec, if you ask for something and it can't be met, according to the spec, you will not get a browser instance. I think we're going to get this one right. Also, people don't read documentation. I'm pretty sure I wrote down, by the way, you should check your capabilities, and it's like, oh, well, never mind. It's a nice idea. So yes, I think we fixed that in the spec, and it should be good now. Other than that, the API is pretty good, right? I'm not fishing for compliments. I'm just letting you know. So, I mean, it was while I was working on like Selenium, and there's this sort of, it's going to be like the machine code. It's going to be this sort of strata of code that you do more sophisticated stuff on. People go, I don't understand. It's like, what do you mean you don't understand? It's just object-oriented. I don't understand. So, all right, well, let me show you some examples of the kind of thing that you might be able to do. And I threw some code together, depending on the day, either very tired, inebriated, traveling, not really paying attention, right? And it was like, here's some sample code of what you could do with the WebDriver interfaces. I assume you're never going to use it. And I put it in what's known as a support package. And it's become central to lots of people's automation strategy. So that was a terrible mistake. In particular, in the Java classes, we have this thing called page factory, which I think is also why people go, I can automate creating a page object. Right? The page factory is this class, and it populates fields in your page objects with these proxies, and you annotate the things you want to be able to find with this find by annotation. Right? Now, to me, that seems pretty basic. I guess, oh, yeah, OK. So I'll just go through, and I'll put this proxy in, and then when I call the proxy, it all works. I was chatting with someone yesterday who goes like, I don't use a page factory. It's like, why not? Well, it eagerly goes and finds everything on the page. It's like, no, it doesn't. It waits, right? It's in the documentation. Again, no one reads documentation. So that's fine. And we have at least 2 pull requests for people going like, I'd like to be able to extend the find by annotation. Like, it needs to do this. Or like, why doesn't it return the select class? It's because you were meant to write code like this, right? You were meant to have a new element finder factory, and it was meant to do, like, it was like just deep, terrible Java. Like, it's a monstrosity. The API is terrible. So yeah, first thing is don't use page factory. Second thing is if you do, here's how you can extend it. You don't need to override find by or anything like that. We have all this stuff for you. It should be good. Should be. But it was a terrible mistake putting it there, right? Because now I can't take it out of the project. Does anyone use this stuff? Have I just gone super nerdy for no readily apparent reason? Yes. I love this stuff. It's good. So the lesson that I took away from things like Page Factory is people don't write their own. They may not even realize it's an option. Like, I was working with a team the other day, and they loved their logging. I don't know why. You ran their tests, and like the console filled up with logs. It's like, what is this telling me? I don't understand. And occasionally, like, something would go by and read. It's like, whoop, that looks important. And I was looking at their code, and in order to get this logging, they had like little methods all over the place that would create a new WebDriver weight, and then they'd log that they'd created a WebDriver weight, and then they go like, this is what I'm going to do, in a separate log message, which they'd pass in, and then they'd do the weight, and then they go like, I have finished waiting now, which is lovely, right? Like 18 lines of log for like one. And it's like, hang on a second. Like they had this sort of page class, and everything was there, and it's like, I can see why you've done this, because apparently logging is important to you. But we can just subclass like Fluent Weight or WebDriver Weight, and we can have that do the logging for you. And by the way, all the expected conditions have a meaningful toString on them. So you don't need a separate method to take a meaningful toString, because that already exists. And I went through their code base, and I deleted like hundreds of lines of code. And people were aghast. What are you doing? You're deleting things. It's like, yes, it's so much fun. Which leads me to expected conditions. We get probably more pull requests for expected conditions than we do for anything else. I think we've had more pull requests for expected conditions than requests to return HTTP status codes. That's an in-joke. You know about this? Does anyone not know about the HTTP status code thing? OK. There were literally no hands up there, so I'm not going to go into that story. But expected conditions. You hit, like, the thing with WebDriver, like the thing we really struggle to do is, like, it should be a guiding API. You hit control space in your favorite IDE, assuming you have auto-completion, and it should give you, like, this list of things, and you go, like, that one, that's the one I want, and you do that. And then we lead you to where you want to be, right? Which is why the locators are called by, because it reads beautifully. You go find element, oh, it needs a by what? OK, and here are my options, right? We hard-coded it. Expected conditions brutally violates this attempt to be concise. And it started off as like, oh, look, here are some example things that you might want to pass to a weight. And then we ended up with this. Oh, God. Now, the reason why we ended up with this is because it's a useful dumping ground for functionality, right? Like, if we'd really been thinking hard about it, I think we'd have done things slightly differently. So the lesson that I take away is not everyone is a sophisticated developer. And it turns out you from 5 years ago is a less sophisticated developer than you today. So be gentle with yourself. When you're reviewing the code and you go like, this is an awful idea, which I do quite often. And then I look at like who wrote it. It's like, I wrote it. I am an awful, awful software developer. I am a great software developer now. Me in the future is sitting there going like, ha, ha, ha. It's going to be great. Like, how do you become a more sophisticated software developer? You make mistakes. You practice. You hone your craft. You try these things. I've done like a lot of my learning in public, and it's quite hard for me to take back some of the terrible mistakes I've made. Like, I'd love to clean up expected conditions, right? Am I going to do it? No, because you guys rely on it. But the internals, we are rewriting those things all the time to be like cleaner, slicker, nicer, better. Like Jim down here took the original IE driver, which I'd written, which was C++ code that was so terrible, when someone reviewed it at Google, he went, I have no idea how this even compiles. And he came back to me 3 days later going, like, I don't know how you've done this. You have a reference to something that cannot be null. You do a null check, and the null check passes. How have you done this? It's like, I have the skills. And Jim comes along and goes like, I'm not a C++ developer. It's like, I'm not either. And he goes, but I've made it a bit better. And it was beautiful, right? You looked at it and went, I'm so happy. But even now, like, Jim is sitting there tweaking and making that thing better and better and better. Like, you learn, you practice. And if you have good APIs, you can practice behind them. One of the important lessons about software development that I was taught by Joe Warnes was, like, have concrete APIs that are wonderful and implementations that are sufficiently poor that they enrage people enough to come and fix it. It's a lovely way of running things. What is not a lovely way of running things is headless browsers, or as I like to think of it, I want to test my app in a browser that no one uses. Does anyone use Phantom.js as their desktop application browser of choice? I'm just checking, right? Because a lot of people go like, I absolutely need to do headless testing. It's like, why? And they go like, I just do. I go, why? Do you not know about perceived and actual safety? And they go, no, which is fine, because I'm going to tell you now, right? So you can tell them. Actual safety, does it work? This is a binary thing. It is either yes or no, or actually with the Heisenberg, it's a maybe, right? But yes or no, does it work? That's actual safety, and you can prove it, right? Perceived safety. Do I believe it's working? You know, if you were to do a bungee jump, you know the actual safety is incredibly high, right? Because they wouldn't stay open very long if every time someone did a bungee jump, they went, oh, forgot to attach the rope. Actual safety is incredibly high. When you're standing there with your feet just over the edge, your perceived safety is like really low. It's terrifying. Unless you've done like bungee jumps all the time, you're drunk, you're high, I don't know, you're mad, suicidal, then your perceived safety might be quite high, right? Oh, look, finally it'll all be over. So the actual safety of headless testing is remarkably low, right? Like it gives you less confidence the application works than testing in a real browser like Chrome, Firefox, IE, Edge, Safari. Like the browsers that people use, right? That's what you should be testing with. So you go like, why do you test with headless browsers? And it turns out, like, and I think we all know this, testing is under-resourced. Who here has enough computing power to run a grid of the size they want for the number of tests they want? Other than people who work at Source Labs. None of us do, right? Like, we don't have enough hardware, we don't have enough software, we don't have enough time. And people say, oh, can you run the test suite? Where are you going to run the test suite? You run it on your desktop, but you've got emails to check, you've got things to do. Like having a browser go flick, flick, flick in your face all the time. Like, why haven't you replied to the email? Can I have my status report? Possibly. Maybe, I don't know. It'll happen. Testing is under-resourced. And that's why people want headless browsers, right? And that's a tragic thing, right? And I don't have an answer to how to fix that, by the way. I just thought I'd point it out and make everyone feel happy. Other things that make me happy? Implicit weights. Who uses implicit weights? Lots of people. Who uses explicit weights? Lots of people. Who uses implicit weights and explicit weights and doesn't know what the hell is going on? Lots of people. Like, we had someone on the IRC channel say, I've set my implicit weight for 2 minutes, and I'm using an explicit weight of 30 seconds, and it waits 2 minutes before it does anything. It's like, well, you did ask for that. Really? And I think it was you, like, very patiently walking people through, like, how these two interact. Implicit weights are a terrible mistake I have made, and I apologize for them. Like, the idea was that we added them because people didn't really know when their DOM changed, and they weren't sure what the heck was going on. And things like all the fancy JavaScript frameworks make it more complicated, right? Like, back in the day, you knew when the page reloaded, but now, yeah, I'm not so sure. So it's like, tell you what, we will make it so if you ask for something that's not there, we'll wait a little bit in case it's just about to arrive, and then we'll hand it to you. But the problem is that people didn't read the docs, and people don't understand like the interaction of these two. And I knew this at the time, and I didn't think hard enough about it. And now we end up with this sort of weight of support questions from people going, I set my implicit weight to the heat death of the universe. Why are my tests taking so long? Well, it's because explicit weights. The advice from the team is always use explicit weights and avoid using implicit weights if you possibly can. Definitely don't do the thing that I've seen occasionally where people just monkey around with the implicit wait time, and they may or may not reset it depending on which code path you go out. Like, hey, if an exception is thrown, my implicit weights are now going to be set to 5 minutes, but if it isn't, it'll go back to 2 seconds. Who knows what's going to happen? It's going to be exciting, I'll tell you that much. It's almost definitely true that no one sets out to do a bad job. Like, who does set out to do a bad job? Have we got any sociopaths in the audience? And will they admit it? Like, just what a depressing life it must be. Hey, I'm going to wake up and I'm going to ruin someone's day. I'm going to make myself miserable in the process. Like, nobody sets out to do that. Unless there's, like, job security, I guess. Like, I used to do a talk about design patterns to ensure job security by having an unmaintainable code base. And I stopped doing that talk because people didn't realize I wasn't serious. So there are a handful of people with very secure jobs because nobody else will touch their code because they followed my advice. Oh, no. Nobody sets out to do a bad job. Nobody sits there and goes like, yeah, I really want to foul up this API design. I really want to do something terrible. But we do it. We make mistakes. That's fine. You know, one of the ways that you could help the Selenium project if you wanted to help us avoid making mistakes, is to go, you know what, this API, can we change it? Can we do something nice with it? File bug reports, file PRs going like, I found a rough edge, and I'd like to smooth it off. Like in Selenium, there's an API that goes like, hey, look, authenticate using, right? So you can log into secure pages. And Leo sent a pull request where it's like, none of the browsers implement this. Why have we got it? We are lying to people when we say this thing should work. And it's like, that is a very good point. And so there's a pull request, like, let's remove it. Like, let's clean things up. Jason Laber, he's on the IRC channel. He goes like, I can't help but notice there are like 18,000 constructors on the Firefox driver. He didn't say that. He actually has the right number. I make things up. I use hyperbole to make my arguments. And it's like, that's a very good point. And he goes like, well, what are we going to do about it? It's like, that is a better question to ask. Telling us it's awful, great. Helping us go like, what should we do? That's even better. So over the next few releases, I think you're going to see us like cleaning bits and pieces up, which is going to be great because, you know, people will be able to get on with their testing. And hopefully, if my assumptions are correct, none of you will really notice the fact that we have deleted like 18 constructors off Firefox driver. Does anyone use anything other than maybe the one that takes profile or the one that takes capabilities? We're safe. 4 minutes ago, who here is a professional tester? Like, that's their job title. Who here feels appreciated for being a professional tester? How many times have you walked onto a project and someone's gone, you're here! Thank you so much for saving us. I literally have no idea whether my code works, and I'd like you to help me make it better. Or do you arrive in a team and they go, code's over there. Make sure it works. It's like, what? I have a friend who likes to say that he can write code incredibly quickly, provided he doesn't need to prove it works. Who here is in a test team that's larger than the development team? OK, and yet somehow you're expected to test all the crap they're producing. What is going on? Like, the role of testing is this sort of incredibly difficult, thoughtful, precise job, right? You're sitting there trying to give confidence that the application is there. You're not trying to prove someone wrong. You're probably not there trying to prove someone wrong. You're attempting to do this very difficult thing, right? And it turns out there's fewer of us than there are of normal developers, fewer testers than there are developers. You need to persuade people to do things right. And you need to be able to lead from the front and show them what it looks like to have good quality code. Those aren't the skills of some junior engineer. Like, the thing that really makes me angry, does anyone see this? He's not good enough to be an engineer. He could be a tester. Anyone see that? No, the other way around. He's not good enough to be a tester. He might be all right as an engineer. Is the thing, right? People don't want testers. They want tech leads. They want strong, capable people who can lead a project toward the end goal of actually functioning. And like, the skills you need and the number of people that there are mean that you need to be good with people. You need to be good at code. You need to have this sort of wealth of skills. You need to be able to step back from the day-to-day grind and go like, are we doing the right thing? How do we verify that this is doing the right thing? Like, in the ideal world for me, we get rid of the title tester, right? And we drop quality. Because quality is something we should all be doing, right? You don't bolt quality on as an afterthought. You don't go like, I've built this bridge entirely out of balsa wood. Can someone check that it's okay? No. I'm not touching it. In fact, I'd sponsor it. I'll stand quite close to it, but it'll be something we bake in, right? Like, I don't know. Tester always feels like a weird role for me, and I'd love it if we could find a really positive way of taking this message, like, we're here to help you write quality code, and we're here to do that. And I think one of the ways we do it is we reflect on the code that we've written, and we go like, I could have done that better. And you're open and honest about that. Part of it is you go and sit with teams and you talk to them. Developers aren't scary. They also have no idea what they're doing. Nobody knows what they're doing. It's called being an adult. If we knew what we were doing, we'd be doing something else, because like, it would be boring. Oh, I know how to do this. Like, it should be a collaborative thing, software development, and quality should be something that we bake in. Selenium is one of the tools that we have at our disposal, but we have other tools as well. Yeah, I mean, that's just a bugbear. I was just writing the slides and it's like, I need to get something off my chest. So thank you all for listening. And I hope you're going to have a fantastic conference. Before I finish, just one thing. How cool is this? So impressed by the organization of this event. Thank you very much to the event organizers. Thank you to the conference people. Thank you to the people behind the scenes, doing the live scribing, the video streaming, the technical people. Like, this conference wouldn't be working as smoothly as it is without them. And thank you all very much for being here. You are the thing that makes Selenium the awesome thing it is to work on. So thank you very much for your time, ladies and gentlemen.